Oh,
There we go. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and happy first day of winter. Hopefully, the good news is we gain 7 seconds tomorrow, and then I think it's 11 seconds the day after that. So we're getting longer days. I don't know about the rest of you, but this video, if we're not careful, is going to end in the dark. Our days end so early. So I'm excited for that. I'm Eric. I think most of you out there know me. I see a lot of faces who I've actually met in person and a lot of names who I know really well. And then co-teaching with me today is Cameron. Cameron, introduce yourself.
hi guys, my name is Cameron. I'm the branch manager for the Seattle office. Also recognize a lot of faces, and yeah, thank you for joining us. It's a little bit. I have a few more attendees than I usually get for my core essentials class. So yeah, enjoy having you guys, and yeah, thanks.
And yeah, I think this is going to be our record Zoom class for Skyline. So you guys are part of something big. Anyway,
No, it's good.
so
It's good.
what was that? I'm sorry. If everybody will do me a favor and go ahead and mute yourself, click on the microphone and you should have a little red bar through it. If you need to speak, we'd like you to raise your hand, and ideally just go ahead and ask questions through the text or the chat button. So that way we won't have a lot of background noise. But very good. Well, the goal today is for you to walk away with a reasonably good handle on what's going on with the changes that we're going to be going through on January 1st. So as a lot of you already know, um, we're going to be changing to what's called a buyer brokerage services agreement on January 1st. It's not a huge change, but it's a change, and it's just going to be kind of more of how you'll be doing things, either as a listing broker or as a buyer's agent. So we're going to go over the forms that are involved there. We're not going to go over all of the form. We're just going to go over the key parts that are changing because of this law. Just to give you all a little bit of background, couple of years ago, NAR and Keller Williams and Remax and a couple other real big brokers on the East Coast, Long and Foster. I'm trying to think. Oh, and a group called, they call it Anywhere now. It's basically the parent company for Century 21, Sotheby's, Coldwell Banker. They all got drawn into a huge class action suit. And that suit was alleging that buyers did not know that their agent was being compensated by the seller. I know it's a little far-fetched to think, well, what, you guys work, the agent worked for free? No, they got paid somehow, right? But that was the allegation, was that there wasn't transparency there. The allegation was also that how could you, a buyer's agent, not not have a conflict of interest if you're getting paid by the seller, that kind of thing. So it was something, like I say, transparency was the big thing there. And some sellers even claimed in this class that they didn't understand that they were paying the agent who was representing the buyer. So I don't know what was going on with the listing agreements in some of those places. Definitely not our listing agreement, but there was confusion on that. So what our Northwest MLS did, as a lot of you already know, there was a change on our forms back in July where we changed our listing agreement to, hang on,
I'm muted.
change our listing agreement. Yeah. um, to reflect, or excuse me, change our purchase and sale agreement so that it said how you were going to be compensated as a buyer's agent. So that changed, but now we're going with a bigger change. That actually is one change that didn't get changed on our purchase and sale agreement, is the language on the part where it says how you're going to be compensated. But the listing agreement is much more explicit as to how the seller is going to pay you. And then there's going to be the buyer brokerage services agreement. It's Form 41. That's going to become mandatory. If you're a buyer's agent, you have to use this form. And that's part of what we're going to talk about a little later in the class here, but it's a Washington state legislatively dictated form. You have to use it. You have to have this buyer's agency agreement. You could have another one. There will be a couple of brokerages that might have their own, but we're going to use Form 41 at Skyline. It's gonna take care of the process for us. Other than that, I mean that's going to be the big change. It's just something that's dictated. You have to do it. Every broker is going to have to do it if they work with a buyer. So you're not really competing on that. You're not going to be competing with some guy who's doing a handshake agreement. If they're doing the handshake agreement, they could actually get fined by the DOL and the Northwest MLS. So you have to have this form. So that's what we're going to jump into. Cameron, do you want to add anything before we jump on into the forms?
No, I'd say, I was just going to say, some of you have already been implementing, a buyer's agency agreement. This is not going to be with all of your clients. It's not going to be a huge change for you guys, but I think there's a lot of benefits to implementing this to your business. Commercial real estate brokers have been doing this for years, and it protects you. It protects your client. So this is a good change. But yeah, no, I'll pass things back to Eric.
Right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to move
Oh yeah,
right
someone's asking
on
about the
in.
forms, Eric. So I
Oh yeah, go ahead.
in the chat bar, if you scroll up, we've had a lot of people joining, but if you scroll all the way to the top, you'll see the Dropbox file with all of the shared material. But we'll also share our screen and show you the forms as we go through, so you don't actually have to follow that. But if you want to download the MLS guide or our pamphlet that we kind of put together, you can do that from that Dropbox file. All right, I'll be quiet.
Awesome. Yeah. And
Hey,
if you
Cameron, I think
received
I
the email
joined
from me
later
yesterday,
and I can't see that link. Could you just reshare it in the
Yeah,
chat, please? Thank
no
you.
problem. I'll reshare it right now.
yeah, and if you got the email from me yesterday, you're going to there's a link to all of the forms on that as well. It's actually a PDF attached to that email. So, um, okay. Well, okay, so we're gonna get going here on this, and so here is the new listing agreement. It's a lot of it is for the most part the same. We're going to focus on the compensation portion. So here it is, Form 1A. You're meeting with your seller, and you're going to be talking to them about how they might be compensating the buyer's agent. By the way, just a side topic, and that is that this is an opinion. This is a wild guess on my part, but I've also talked to a lot of managers, not only at Skyline but other companies, some high-level brokers, and the general consensus is that nothing's really going to change as far as how sellers do things. They're going to understand that the average buyer out there can't afford to pay their broker's compensation without digging into their down payment or into their closing costs or something like that. So they're not going to have necessarily a bunch of additional funds to pay you 2-3%, whatever it might be. The sellers kind of know that, and they know that it can be encapsulated into a mortgage if they build it into the price. And so that's what they're going to be doing. And most sellers are not going to reduce their price so that they can reduce the amount of commission they're paying. They're just not worried about that stuff. And so those will be conversations that you're going to want to develop with your seller. But I think for the most part, sellers just understand that they are going to be paying the fees for both brokers. So I don't think we're going to see a huge change there. We're going to be seeing a little more commission compression going on out there just because that's the trend right now. The average listing is 5%, 2.5% to both sides. We're starting to see more and more where that's being squeezed a little bit. The good news is our prices are as high as ever, and therefore the commissions are actually, your paycheck is really good, even at 2.5%. It's still pretty good. But anyway, that said, I just wanted to kind of go there. Most sellers are going to be okay with it. They're not going to question anything here. But if they do, here's basically how it's going to look. So you're looking at the form. Hopefully everybody can see it. I'll just, Cameron, I'll lean on you. Can you see Form 1A?
Yep. Can see it great.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. So here we go. So we're gonna jump ahead to page 2 where it says compensation. If during the listing term the seller sells the property and the sale closes, or the sale fails to close due to the seller's breach of terms of the purchase and sale agreement, the seller shall pay compensation as follows. And there's a few options here. So the first one is A, the listing firm compensation. This one is going to be how the seller is going to pay you, the listing broker. So that'll be right here. You can fill in whatever percent, just for purposes of this class. Let's say you put the listing firm is going to get 3% of the price. Okay, it's how much you specifically are going to get, not the combined total, just what you're going to get. And then we go down to A2, and it says, if the buyer is not represented by a buyer brokerage firm, the listing firm compensation shall be, so this would be a combined amount. So say you were going to get an additional 1%. So say you had negotiated 3% to list the property, and you were going to get an additional 1% from the seller, or maybe, a flat $1,000, whatever it might be, then you're going to put in that amount here. Okay, so that's where you're going to get additional. So it would be a dollar amount if you were doing a dollar amount maybe for the listing firm. Some firms out there do flat dollar listings, that kind of thing. We, for the most part, deal with percentage. So say you put 3% in A1. In A2, if you're going to ask for another 1%, you would put 4 on line 48 there. Okay, so it would be the combined amount. In that circumstance, it's combined. I hope that makes sense. Over the last couple of years, we've had situations where it went from being combined to separate, and now so we actually have combined and separate here. So this is only if you are a seller or a listing broker who is working with an unrepresented buyer. All right, then we go down to number B, buyer brokerage firm compensation. So this is how much you're going to pay as a seller, to the buyer brokerage firm. Okay, so say there's a percent. So say you put in 3% there, 3% of the sales price to a cooperating member of the MLS representing the buyer, which includes another broker affiliated with the listing firm who represents the buyer. So it's not, there's no problem if, say, Cameron is bringing a buyer. It doesn't make a dual agency problem if I'm the listing broker or you're the listing broker. So that's a pretty simple one, and that's the one I see that most sellers are going to check that. They're gonna fill that in. It might be on A1 they would put in 2.5, and on B1 they put in another 2.5, and then you'd have a 5% total listing. B2, I want you to forget B2 exists because it has to do with dual agency. And as a Skyline broker, you have signed a contract saying you will not do dual agency because our E&O carrier will not cover you for errors and omissions if you do dual agency. So never, ever, ever put anything on B2. Let's move on to B3. So it says here, if checked, the offer to pay the buyer brokerage firm compensation shall extend to licensed brokerage firms that are not members of the MLS. I'm personally going to say to check that. Now, I can't absolutely speak to everybody here. My personal opinion is you check that. So say you get a broker from Vancouver or Spokane, both of those are outside of the Northwest MLS. But if they bring a buyer and it's a good offer, of course you want to see that, right? We also want to pay that broker accordingly because they are members, they are licensed in the state of Washington to sell real estate. No reason not to. So my personal opinion is you check that box. That would be again, this is going to be a discussion you'll have with your seller. It's up to them. But if they ask why, just explain to them what the circumstances are there. They are still licensed. They just are not. They happen to live outside of the Northwest MLS, and their client wants to work with them anyway. Okay, and then it goes on in 4 to say the buyer brokerage firm compensation shall be paid as set forth above, unless modified by the buyer and buyer brokerage firm in a mutually accepted purchase and sale agreement. So that's we're going to get to that in a moment, but that's where where there can be differences paid by the buyer's broker as well, or the buyer to the buyer broker. The offered amount may not be withdrawn or reduced with respect to the buyer after the buyer or the buyer brokerage firm has notified the listing firm or seller of that buyer's intent to submit an offer, and for 3 calendar days thereafter. The buyer brokerage firm is an intended third-party beneficiary of this agreement. So hopefully that all makes sense. By the way, yes, you cannot change the compensation in your listing, and then have it apply to an offer that you've already received or an offer that you receive within 3 days of that change. So if you're ever working with a seller who wants to reduce the compensation or something like that, just let them know that any offer you get for the next 3 days is still gonna fall within that compensation. And then the next part is compensation negotiable. This is the part where we want to be completely transparent, and the seller acknowledges that there are no standard compensation rates, and the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law. In addition, the seller acknowledges that offering compensation to the buyer brokerage firm is not required. So that line is the one where they may say, well, wait a minute, why am I paying that? And that's the conversation you're going to want to have with your seller, to explain to them how we're never going to say that buyers won't see your house or that brokers won't show your house, because the compensation isn't there, although the law does allow you as a broker to not show a property for which you are not being compensated. But you're going to have a buyer's agency agreement, so that changes it a little bit. So that's it for Form 1A, the big changes there that really affect compensation. I want to just quickly pop it open. Did any questions come up,
Yeah,
Cameron,
we got
during
a few
that we need to
questions.
address?
We have a few questions. So a few people asked about dual agency. I think you answered that question. Yes, that section, what is it? B2 does refer to dual agency, but we don't allow it at Skyline Properties. So I think Eric already answered that. Casey, I think this question was referring to when you mentioned that buyers could be liable for the commission in the case that a listing agent or a seller is not offering a commission. He was wondering how the lender would fund this. It wouldn't be funded by the lender. It would pretty much be added to the buyer's closing costs. So they would have to increase their closing costs to be able to compensate for the difference of commission.
That's something I've personally talked to several lenders trying to plant the seed that it would be a really powerful thing to have as part of their package, that they would allow compensation to fall into closing costs, so they could buy the buyer broker, or so that so it could be rolled into the loan if the seller isn't paying it. But it's not an absolute thing yet. So talk to your lenders and see if their underwriters will allow that to get rolled into closing costs.
Okay, and then we have 2 more questions about dual agency. No, it's not allowed at Skyline. Juan says also it sounds like dual agency, and that is correct. We have a few people raising their hands.
A2, let me go back to A2. One is not dual agency. It is an unrepresented buyer. Okay, that's very different. It says if the buyer is not represented by a buyer brokerage firm, so therefore they're unrepresented. This gets a little bit outside of this class, but if any of you are ever working with an unrepresented buyer, then you would make sure that you put on your purchase and sale agreement, you check the box that buyer represented by, and it says unrepresented, and you make sure there is no buyer brokerage firm or broker information in the bottom left-hand corner of your PSA, and you're going to use Form 42 stating very clearly that you represent the seller and not the buyer, and the buyer has to sign that. That's outside of this class. If any of you get into a situation where maybe you're listing a property and you get a buyer calling you directly and they want you to write it up, you can do it. But you got to make sure they understand they are not represented, and you don't give them any guidance or anything like that. They're pretty much on their own. You're just going to write it down on a form for them. So
In lines
So that's
47
how-
and 48, could you go through the example percentages you mentioned in that it was a summation on row 48? Like you gave
yeah, so on 48,
Mhm.
yeah, that's going to be a combination. That's going to be what if you're getting more. So say you're getting 3% as a listing broker, and you and the seller can agree that you can get a little more if you've got to do the extra work because of the buyer is unrepresented. So they may pay you 4% instead.
Okay, thank you.
They may pay you 6. This is all stuff that you will negotiate with the seller, but let them. That's how it works. It's going to be only if it's an unrepresented buyer. There's going to be additional work. You got to write it up for both sides. You're going to have to be dealing with escrow for both sides, things like that. You may not be representing the other party, but it doesn't mean that you are not going to be there to let them in the house to do the inspection and to deal with some of the stuff that you would deal with as a buyer's broker.
Got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
All right.
Any other
yeah,
questions?
Nancy was wondering what form this is. It's the listing agreement.
What was that?
Nancy was wondering what form we're looking at, and it's the listing
We're
agreement.
looking at Form 1A. That's
Yeah.
the listing agreement.
And then Juan was curious, as a buyer's broker, what form do you use to negotiate commissions if no SOC is being offered? That
It's
is
going to be a Form 41C, same as always. Yeah.
okay. And then we have,
Can I throw something in?
yeah,
Ross?
What's that?
If I could just throw in a quick question. Before, we have always added in when you were an unrepresented buyer, a sentence that both the buyer and seller acknowledge that the buyer's unrepresented and that we suggest that they get legal counsel on the transaction. Is that something we still want to write in somewhere on a Form 34 or 22D, or is it necessary anymore?
It's not mandatory. It's a good idea. It's a good practice, but it's not mandatory.
Yeah.
And Form 42 will pretty much cover you on that.
Cool, thank you.
Casey, do you still have a question? I see your hands raised. You want to unmute?
Yeah, and it's more like, I guess, general. It's around C, compensation negotiable. I know this was always, I mean, it's always negotiable, but is there a like it says, no standard compensation rates? I guess I'm not as versed with kind of where this came from as far as the NAR lawsuits and all that, but is there any discussions or understanding that in the industry that compensation for listing agents might be all over the place? And then is it bad to have a standard, kind of average industry rate? Because a lot of other industries do this as well, construction, plumbers, they all kind of want to either pay their people somewhat within a range, or they charge similar pricing and are aware of their competition and pricing. I'm just asking to understand kind of where I should be personally and how to have verbiage around this.
Kind of, not to oversimplify, but we could go deep into the weeds on this as to antitrust laws and things like that. But the long and short of it is that in real estate, there is no set compensation. So it is always negotiable, and that's kind of the answer you have to run with. Like I say, it gets into something where if we say the industry charges this amount, well, that's when all of a sudden we get into antitrust. It doesn't mean that you can't be competitive. If you're up against somebody else, and if you find out they're charging 3, you could say I'm doing 2.5, whatever. But and yeah, you get into some other industries, and yeah, they have union rates and this and that, but that doesn't get into like I say, the antitrust laws and all of that. So that's the real answer is always going to be compensation is always negotiable. So it's whatever you and the seller agree upon.
Rick, so under C, compensation negotiable, does the seller have the flexibility of negotiating after the offer that comes in? It may be lower than what the asking is, and the seller, does that give seller the flexibility or power to negotiate the new rate?
No, so whatever is published in the Northwest MLS, in other words, what shows up as the compensation on the listing, the seller is bound by contract to that because of this contract. Now, they could negotiate with you later to change that, but if they can't change it in the middle of a contract, they can't change it when an offer comes in, because the language in B4 right up above that says that they can't.
Right. Okay. Got it.
All right. Anybody else? If not, we're going to move on to
let's do one more question, and then let's keep it moving because we got a lot more to cover. Geeta, if you want to unmute, I've seen that you've had your hand raised for a while. Geeta, you can also type your question in the chat bar and we can answer it if your mic's not working.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay.
Uger, yes, this will be recorded. I'm recording it right now.
Yes.
Yeah. All right, let's keep moving on.
Okay, I'm going to move on to very quickly, just to show you on the PSA. I'm going to just scroll down to the compensation section, and here it is, the buyer brokerage. So part number 17, if you look in the middle of the page around where my cursor is here, actually, I'll point to 16 as well. This is where the unrepresented box would come in. If you've got a buyer who's unrepresented, this is the box you check. You'll never check the limited dual agent boxes. By the way, state law has changed on because there's so much confusion on dual agency. You have to declare yourself a limited dual agent, and you have to lay that out for both the buyer and the seller and have them sign off on that. Because you are limited in what you can do if you're doing dual agency. But anyway, moving on to number 17 here, the buyer brokerage firm compensation. So you'll see the first box here is pay as offered. So say they're offering 2.5%, you're good with that. You just check that pay as offered box and fill in 2.5% on the you're going to check it. It'll say percentage here most likely, and you'll just type in the 2.5% here on amount offered in listing. These forms aren't live yet, so we can't do the interactive ones where we can show you exactly what it's going to say. But anyway, most times it's going to be a percentage here. Most times it's going to be 2.5 or 3% here in this line. And most of your situations, you're going to check pay as offered. Now, then there's going to be the time though where the seller is offering nothing or 1% or something like that. Then you can check the other box, and then it's C addendum. And the addendum is going to be Form 41C. Okay, but and then you'll fill in what that's going to be, and it could be a combination of the buyer and the seller paying things, that kind of thing. You can ask the seller to pay the entire amount that your buyer is willing to offer you. And so anyway, that's really it on the purchase and sale agreement. That has not changed. It's something that's going to be more prevalent now, is that box where it says other C addendum. So now we're going to move to the buyer brokerage services agreement. So this is the form that has changed considerably. This was Form 41 was a buyer agency agreement before. Now it's the buyer brokerage services agreement. We're not going to deal with all of the language on the first page, but we're going to scroll down to, you can see here where it's limited dual agency. By the way, Skyline, we don't allow any dual agency, whether it's limited or otherwise. So you won't use that section. But here's where your buyer is going to say whether or not they're going to compensate you. Cameron, I'm going to let you buzz through this section real quick.
Awesome. First, can you scroll up a little bit so we can kind of explain the difference between non-exclusive and exclusive? So
good idea. Yeah.
Yep. So we'll start with section 3. We'll go down to 3C. So it says exclusive buyer may not enter into an agency relationship with another real estate firm during the term for the purchase of real property in the area exclusive agency. So that means they're working directly with you, and they don't have the opportunity to go see properties with another broker and write an offer. They'll still be liable for paying your commission. Non-exclusive, so a buyer may enter into a non-exclusive agency relationship with other real estate firms during the term. That just means that they can go work with any other broker, but in the case that they did write an offer with you on a certain property, then they would be accountable for the commission, but they can still work with any other broker, and almost kind of defeats the whole purpose of this form in my belief. But yeah. All right, do you mind scrolling down a little bit? All right.
Hey, Cameron, if it is a non-exclusive, what is the incentive to work with that buyer?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not really sure. I can't really answer that question, but I guess that gives them the flexibility to go work with any other client. But if I'm spending time getting in a car to go show properties to a client, I would expect them to have an exclusive agency relationship. But if maybe, I've had buyers who maybe want to just look at one property with me and see how that goes. In that situation, I don't know, can you think of any other situations, Eric?
Say you're doing an open house, and they walk in and they say that they've got an agent they've worked with before, but they'd be willing to work with you to, maybe they think they're going to get an advantage by working with you directly on the open house, because you're doing the open house. I haven't thought of a good reason to ever do non-exclusive to, I don't think I personally would work with a client who wasn't going to be loyal to me from day one. So, but there might be that exception. The open house one is pretty much the only one I've ever thought of. Or maybe you get that, if any of you are doing Zillow leads and you get that one guy who's calling you, or you get that lead from Zillow and they want to see just the one house and they've never met you before and they're not willing to commit to you for the long haul. I can kind of see it, but still wouldn't be my personal thing. The other thing is if they do want to go non-exclusive, you need to make sure that they haven't signed an exclusive with somebody else.
Yeah, and
Oh.
that's one of the questions that I think Kai.
I have a question.
So, sorry, let me just answer
Go
this
ahead,
for this.
Gita.
Kai was asking, as a buyer broker, how can we verify the buyer has not signed exclusive agency agreement with another broker? There's no direct system. You just need to ask, right? When you sit down with a buyer and you do your buyer consultation appointment, you would just say, do you know, have you signed an agreement with any other brokers? Yeah, Gita, go ahead.
If they sign with you as an exclusive, it's going to be whoever they signed the most recent exclusive with is going to be the one who's going to win in that situation. So, you know, if they're signing exclusives with multiple parties, and you can show that they had an exclusive with you, and you wrote up the contract, you're going to win out in that one.
Eric, I have a question on 3C non-exclusive. A lot of times we, within our agency, if I am traveling or something like that, I request somebody else to help me, and then I compensate for their time. Is that do that fall? Can it fall under, because if that person is showing the property, does that cause any problems with the non-exclusive? I mean, is that inferred as non-exclusive?
But that goes down a whole different path. And the other broker is showing them the property, but they're doing it because you are, you know, they're partnering with you, or you're compensating them, whatever it is. If any of you work with other brokers in that way, where you're having them do showings for, or all that, as a manager, as your designated broker, because I cannot tell you how many conflicts I've had to deal with on this, please get it in writing what's going on and how it's going to break down. Okay. That's
Okay.
different than the non-exclusive. They're not acting as a representative for this
Good to know.
buyer. They're merely opening the door for them. It's a very different thing.
Okay.
It's really going to come down to, in a Northwest MLS arbitration, it's going to, you know, we've got to prove that you had the right to write this offer, and that you were the one who was chosen by the buyer to write this offer. So it's going to come down to writing the offer, not opening the door.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, my question. So,
Go for it, Gita.
Sure, Gita, go ahead.
yeah, thank you. So, like in the listing agency agreement, let's say they mentioned like 3% is the buyer agent compensation, and we also signed this buyer agency form 41A agreement with the buyer. Hey, like 2% is my compensation. So, in that situation, what is that the buyer agent will get? Whether the 3% that the seller is offering, or whatever between the, based on the 41A 2%, which one the
So actually,
buyer agent will get?
we will cover that on the next page. There's this whole section for that.
Okay. Okay. Okay, then I'll wait. I have multiple questions around the same topic, maybe, but I'll just wait. Thank you.
No problem. There's a whole section that covers that, so we'll get there shortly. Rachel, you were asking if you want to terminate. Yes, you can. I think it's Form 53, Eric. I will also cover that.
Yeah, and actually, yes, somebody answered the question for us on there. And yes, Form 53, that is part of the package here that you received, or that you can download from the chat section. Yeah, Form 53 is actually part of that. So that is where you can break that agreement.
Okay, and then next question is, the expiration of the service agreement is for 60 days, paragraph 2. Can we change it to up to 6 months?
So
Yeah.
here somebody's asking, yeah, is there a term for that? And that's actually in the form. We didn't go into that in depth here, but it defaults to 60 days. You can, whatever you want to negotiate with your buyer, you can do that.
Yeah. And that should probably answer Dershawn's question.
And one more question from me. So when do we need to enter into this agreement? Like it is so happening that we get a client when we start working them, showing the homes and all. Like I agree. The first time we meet the buyer is to sign it, but not that every buyer is willing to sign upfront because it has a cost. If the other side, the seller doesn't pay, they have to pay from their pocket. They'll have all those concerns. But is it something we can wait until they decide, hey, I wanted to write an offer. Before writing an offer, can we get this signed?
So according to the DOL and the MLS, before you even start showing them properties, you're supposed to send you over the agency pamphlet and get this signed. But Eric, if you have any input as well.
There's going to be times when maybe go out and show a house, but I wouldn't show more than one house without having this agreement. And yeah, technically you are supposed to, as soon as you do render any kind of real estate services to a buyer, you are supposed to give them the law of real estate brokerage or law of real estate agency. It's going to be a 4-page pamphlet, which is nice instead of the old 7-pager. You have to hand that over, and at that point, that is the right time to have this discussion with people, and because you don't want to be. I personally wouldn't want to be doing it as I'm writing up their offer, saying, "Oh, hey, by the way." So work on it in advance. Let them, and we're gonna go through some objections later on in the class here. That's part of the goal here. But the big thing is that they're going to have this no matter who they work with. It might as well be you, and kind of treat it that way. Work with them, tell them that it's state law, it's Northwest MLS rules, that they're going to have to do this no matter who they are working with, and hopefully that will convince them that you're not doing something underhanded, sneaky, trying to ding them in some way. No, it's the law.
Thank you, Eric. One more question around that is, so what happens to the contracts that are, to the transactions that are already we got into contract where we don't have this document at all, but will be closing next year?
We are going to require it. So if you wrote and got mutual acceptance on your offer December 31st of this year or earlier, we're not going to require it. But we as a company, and I've actually talked to managers at other companies, this is going to be the case at all of them, because it is something that can be audited by the DOL and the Northwest MLS. We are going to require that you have this. If we see an offer, and we're also going to require that you keep this for any person you show a home to, because there could be a dispute at some point or something like that. So we're gonna require it, and we're gonna ask you to keep these for everybody who you work with, or upload them to SkySlope. Biggest problem with SkySlope is it's really meant for actual completed, for contracts that are in play versus offers that didn't get accepted. So we are, for now, we're just going to ask you to make sure you hang on to, because it is DOL law that you hang on to any transaction you write for 3 years. So keep these as well for 3 years.
So Eric,
I'm going to jump over to the chat questions really quick. Orlando asks if the MLS has a record of exclusive agreements. They're not planning to. It's really going to be something where you're not going to be able to look it up and see did Bob Smith sign an agreement with somebody already or anything like that. That's probably not going to be happening. I like the idea, but I think it's too cumbersome for them to probably deal with it. Unlike the listing agreements, which are going to be, right. I mean, it's not that you can see the listing agreement, but who the specific home is signed off with somebody. Rachel is asking a question. If you have shown property previously to the buyer, but they end up buying with another agent, but they broke the agreement, They are responsible to compensate you, correct? And yes, if you had an exclusive agreement with them and you showed them the home, and then they went ahead and wrote it up with somebody else, maybe they, they went over to the listing broker or something or whatever it might be. Yeah, then it would be something that would go to Northwest MLS arbitration at that point to, and as long as you've got the paperwork showing it, probably be in good shape. Arbitrations are never 100% certain that you're going to win, but the more paperwork you have working for you, the more likely that's going to be the case. So that's another reason why it's so important to have this. We've had a lot of disputes over the years. All of us managers have had to deal with them, where a broker wrote up an offer, their offer didn't get accepted, their client, for all intents, fired them. Maybe didn't tell them they were fired, but they went off and worked with somebody else. They cheated on them. The MLS looks at that as you've been fired by that client if you don't have a buyer agency agreement. But part of the reason that they want to do this as well is that it's gonna end a lot of these disputes. So hopefully that all makes sense.
Eric, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, I had a question. I had a client that I showed him like 3 houses, and I had the exclusive agency signed by him in place, and he bought a house from a different agent within a week of signing that document. I didn't show him the house, but he went and bought a house from somebody else instead of sticking
that's
with
getting
me.
outside. That's outside of and we're not going to get into specifics today in this class on things that have happened under our current law. But Michael, I want you to email me all of the documentation on that, and we can take it up with the manager at the other broker's firm. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Anna asks, if someone calls you, a friend, family member, to show them one house, maybe the neighbor listed, or they're interested in one particular house, do we need this agreement to show them the home? I'm going to answer yes. I want you to have it with your buyers, period. And if it's somebody who's a friend or a family member, they shouldn't push back on signing this with you. If they're only going to look at one home and they aren't comfortable signing a 60-day contract with you, I'd ask them why they're not comfortable with that, number one. But that said, do the non-exclusive, but you have to have it. If you're going to write up an offer, you have to have this there. And really, we want you to have it. We just want you to be in the habit of doing it from the start. It's going to be harder to get it once you're actually moving through the process. If you've shown them 20 houses and then you ask them for this, it's going to raise questions. But if you're in your first meeting with them, it's just going to be something that'll be fairly simple to answer. It's new. Now, if it's a client you've been working with for the past 6 months, that's going to be a little more challenging, but that's when you just blame the law. You've got this easy scapegoat out there. Use it. We love having a really good, easy, simple answer as to why we're doing it, and that's the big one, especially if they're dedicated to working with you anyway. And this Naranjan asks, does the form have to be submitted to the seller along with the offer? No, it does not. All right, Cameron, you want to jump back into
Sure. Where
How
were
about
we?
escrow,
compensation?
Eric?
Yeah, Nick,
Or
go
five?
ahead.
Does does it require to be submitted to escrow, or I mean, how does the escrow know what the compensation is if
Well, Nick, the 41 is just an agreement between you and the buyer. There's the form 41C. So,
Yeah.
The 41 only comes into play if there's a discrepancy on a commission or if your buyer needs to compensate for the difference between the listing. It's just an agreement
Got
between the buyer. I think what you're thinking about is the form 41C.
okay, yeah,
That would be implemented into a purchase and sale agreement and signed by both the buyer and the seller.
got it.
Again, circling back to Form 21 or any of our purchase and sale agreements, on the compensation section, you would check the box that says other, see attached. Escrow is going to be looking for that. They're going to look for what it is that's attached that dictates what the compensation is.
All right, Marissa Bill, you've had your hand raised for a while. Let's do one last question and then we can move on.
Yeah, I would like to know at least the approach with the buyers right now, because before this was so easy to say the seller is gonna pay me the commission. But right now, if the seller is giving 1%, how can I tell the buyer, look, I need you to pay me a little more, or I'm not sure how
We're gonna
handle
get
it.
there, Mari. We're gonna get there later on in the class. I think right now we'll just go
Oh,
over.
okay.
But we'll go over that later on in the class. All right, so section 5. This is where you put in what your compensation would be. So this refers to, it says the compensation for buyer's brokerage firm services, the compensation shall be, and then you can either put a percentage, a purchase amount, a total amount, or other. Section B refers to limited, dual agent, and represents, which that wouldn't apply to us, right, Eric? So because we don't do dual agency. And then section C is also just another disclosure that says buyer acknowledges that are no standard compensation rates, and the compensation in this agreement is fully negotiable and not set by law.
So this is what the buyer is agreeing to pay you upfront. This is going to be a hard conversation for a lot of us. It's something that we haven't talked to our buyers about. Hey, what are you going to pay me? The next section we're going to move down to is going to break it down as to when they would pay that, if at all. So just again, this is the agreement between you and the buyer. So you're basically laying it out right now that, hey, you're going to pay me, you know, whatever it is, 2.5%, 3%, whatever you agree with your buyer.
Do you want to do a few questions, Eric, or do you want to keep moving?
Oh, go ahead if there's some more. Yeah.
Okay. So Casey, why don't you go first? You've had your hand raised. Casey?
Sorry, it cut out. I didn't hear. Yeah, so let me know if we should shelf this and come back to maybe another time because it's hypotheticals, but I feel like, you know, you meet a buyer, maybe it's a referral or just any circumstance, you know, like it's really day one. You have no idea how much time, if you're going to spend with this buyer a week or 8 months. So, you know, that's kind of where I guess what I'm wondering is, say you negotiate a certain percentage on commission, you're going to work with this buyer, say 2.5, or let's say 3%, right? And then maybe either you end up working with that buyer a different amount of time, or maybe it does take a whole year until you've found them a house, and then the seller is offering I don't know, more or less. And it does make sense to then renegotiate commission up or down. Like maybe you want to give them a deal, or, you know, you worked with them shorter, or maybe you worked with them longer, whatever it might be. Do we need to go back to this form, I'm assuming, and redo it? Or is it kind of the standard process where it's like, maybe we put it on a form 34 or something else? Does it, where I'm going make sense?
So you're saying if down the road you want to make changes because you've spent a certain amount of time, you would need to actually go through and make changes to this form. And there's also another form to amend the length of the relationship, or is that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I'm just saying, like, you know, circumstances that could affect commission in. So maybe you're spending more or less time with a buyer where it's costing you more money, or maybe like you've come to find them a home where, say you negotiated 3%, seller is offering, you know, 2.75. The gap is so small that you decide, like, I just want to get them to home, it doesn't matter. Like, we need to, no matter what, always, anytime I'm assuming we're changing commission from the time of this form agreed upon, any amount of time, we need to go back and redo this form basically between the buyer. And then at that point, if we're redoing this form, is it before we move into the offer of the home?
So Casey, a lot of it's going to depend upon what the seller is offering. So yeah, you're going to want to move into this before, because you don't know what a given seller is going to be offering on the given home that you're writing an offer. So, because that's the variable you can't control. But it could be a good thing for your buyer. It could be the seller's offering 3, and that would get your buyer off the hook. But I would, whatever it is that you feel is going to be fair, you're going to want to negotiate with your client. And if you have to change that because circumstances change, then you have to negotiate that with them. And if you are offering them something and you didn't write it, if you're offering them a rebate of the commission or something like that, I want you to get that in writing as well. And that's actually coming up on this form too. So there's a wide variety of things that can come up here, but long and short of it is yeah, get everything in writing. It's just a good practice in general. And that's part of the reason that we want to be transparent. We want these people to understand how we're being paid. And, a lot of us, it's almost embarrassing on certain houses to let the seller or the buyer know that you're getting 3% on a $3 million property. That's a lot of money. And it may be something we don't really want to tell them about because maybe we only showed them a couple of houses. These are things you can renegotiate them. You can do things with it, but we want you to get it in writing. Okay.
Trevor, you want to ask your question before we go to the bar?
Yeah, mine's kind of along the same lines of that renegotiating. Like, let's say we're getting them into a home and there's just a discrepancy. We had 3 that they're offering 2.5, and I don't want to worry about that 0.5%, right? Is there, that's just refill this out and you guys are good with it? Because I know like you got like the brokerage is involved also in that contract technically. So like no big deal. We're good to renegotiate that anytime we want between us and the buyers, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like page 2 addresses that.
Yeah, page 2 kind of addresses that, but also if you guys need to make any amendments later on, that's totally fine. Yeah. Skylines, with our commission structure, some other brokerages might be a little bit more difficult with adjusting commissions, but with our commission structure, you have the flexibility. We want you to keep your commission, but you can adjust as needed. All right. James, when we have a new client, we just have to take their word that they did not sign this agreement with another broker. If they did and did not realize that they did, we sign a deal, then what happens? Eric, you kind of talked about that, but you want to take that?
Yeah, we did. And it's if it had to go to arbitration at the MLS, so say this other broker popped up and said, wait a minute, I had an exclusive thing written with them, but then they've done an exclusive with you as well, and they didn't remember they did it. I find that hard to believe when people say they don't remember what they signed.
Yeah.
But that said, if they've signed it with you, and they've told, and they say they didn't have an agreement with somebody else, you don't have any way to double check that. You're not going to be penalized for it at arbitration. In other words, you're probably going to win. I can't guarantee anything at arbitration. It gets it's all about what paperwork do we receive that the other side had that we didn't know existed, that kind of thing. So but it's an honor system. When they say they're doing exclusive and they say they're doing it with you, then they are doing it with you. If they go off and cheat on you and do it with somebody else and do an exclusive with them and write up an offer with them and it gets accepted, we can battle for it. I just can't guarantee the outcome.
Thank you. And so you're saying that the last person who wrote the agreement probably is the winner, or the first person? person, just clearing.
No, probably it's the last one. If
I
it's
feel you.
whoever
Okay.
has the exclusive agreement and writes up the offer, the MLS is going to look favorably upon that. If you were the last one to have an agreement, but they wrote up an offer with another one that they had an agreement with, I don't know what directions that's going to go. We're kind of getting into the Wild West here. It's uncharted territory. We don't know how arbitration is going to work there, and the MLS and in the classes I've been to with the MLS has not been committal on that, because I think it's completely circumstantial. It's going to depend upon all of the circumstances and what went on there. So I can't make any guarantees there, but my personal opinion is that if you write the offer and you have an exclusive with them, you should get paid. And that's what I would fight for. I can't guarantee that'd be the outcome, but believe me, that's what we're going to be fighting for in arbitration if that happens.
Okay.
Hey, Eric. This is Darshan. So I asked a question. Is this form is mandatory before we start showing houses to the buyers?
Yes.
Yes.
So second question is, how can we guarantee, I mean, my buyer, let's say that if we put down 2.5% commission compensation, and they're going to say, well, we don't know which house we're going to buy. And then I don't know what's the commission the seller is paying. So they're not gonna, they're gonna be
It depends
hesitant.
on what do you want to get paid? You know, I mean, do you want to get 2.5% no matter what? Your buyer is going to agree
It
to that.
depends on what the seller.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves here, because we're going to move into a whole other section here that's going to kind of break this down for you a little bit, and it's going to give you some options with your buyer. Okay, so, but that said, yeah, you don't know, but it's something you're going to have this conversation, and that's it's I'm not going to say it's an easy conversation, but it's one you're going to want to know up front. How much do you want to get paid? And then if the seller offers that much, great, you're going to be good. If the seller isn't offering that much, then your buyer is going to agree up front to pay you the difference. And you know, these are relationship questions. These are, you know, things that, you know, we hope you have a good relationship with your buyer to where they're comfortable talking to you about all of this and you're comfortable talking to them, because it's not necessarily it's not something any of us are used to. It's a tougher conversation, but really it's going to come down to what do you want to get paid. And if, you know, it kind of goes back to something Casey was talking about. What if you show them one house and they buy it? You know, is the compensation, you know, what you're asking from the buyer fair at that point? And that'll be things where you can renegotiate it if that were to come up. If your buyer's willing to offer you 3% if you're not getting anything, and you get a 3%, you know, 3%, or say you get a 2.5%, you know, that might be that you're not going to charge them that other 0.5%. And that's okay. But we do want you to go ahead and try to get that in writing, so that just so everything is clear, that there's no dispute on any of that.
Hey, Eric, is it okay if I interject? This is Ross.
Please, Ross. Yeah.
I was just going to make a suggestion, never to tell you two fine managers how to run the training here, but do you think it'd be a good idea just to finish going through your training first before taking more questions? Just because I think some of these questions that are being asked now, you are going to cover, it sounds like, in the other portion of it. I'm just showing here, there's like 26 more on the chat, and there's over 100 people here. And way up north in Bothell, it's starting to get dark. So anyway, just a suggestion.
Yeah, Eric, if you want to.
No, and I'm on board with that. You know, I don't want anybody to feel left out on their questions.
Right.
But I think I would like to go ahead and finish out the form here, so that I think a lot of the questions are going to get answered.
And Eric, what I can do is while you're speaking, I can just message people back directly and answer their questions.
Sure.
So why don't you just keep teaching, and I'll take care of chat and replying to people.
Perfect. Okay, so we're moving on to page 2 out of 3 of the Form 41. Okay, the buyer brokerage services agreement. And so we're going to go to section 6 here, and that is a seller compensation offer. And this is where there's a lot of potential things you can do. And it'll hopefully some stuff will become more clear as we do this. So a seller may, but is not required to, offer compensation to the firm for representing the buyer in the purchase of the seller's real property. The seller's offer is disclosed in the listing, shall be stated in the purchase and sale agreement, and may be accepted by the buyer on behalf of the firm in the purchase and sale agreement. So that's again where we talked about that compensation section in the PSA. That's where the seller is offering a certain amount, and it'll show up on the PSA. And then we're going to say we're going to accept it as offered, or we're going to do something different. If we're going to do something different, we should have probably had it worked out with our buyer in advance on this form. So that's this section is where we're going to work that out in advance with our buyer. The buyer said on the previous section 5 how much they would be willing to pay us if no compensation was being offered. But here is where we can make alterations to that. So A, the seller's offer equal to the compensation. If the seller's offer is equal to the compensation, and compensation is what the buyer is offering you, the buyer shall accept the seller's offer, and buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay the firm. Okay, so if your buyer's offering you 2.5 and the seller's offering 2.5, then your buyer's off the hook. They do not have to pay you anything at closing. So that's pretty simple. That's not an option. It's just what it is. But then we get into the next one where there's going to be a couple of options. So that's B. The seller's offer is greater than the compensation. If the seller's offer is greater than the compensation again is what your buyer is offering you. So say your buyer offered you 2%, and the seller is offering 2.5. Therefore, the seller's offer is greater. The buyer shall accept the seller's offer, and buyer shall not be obligated to separately pay the firm. The amount of the seller's offer that is greater than the compensation shall be, first box is paid to firm. That's kind of the norm. That's what we're used to. So say the seller's offered you 2, or excuse me, the buyer has offered you 2% in the compensation section, and the seller is offering 2.5 in the compensation. Seller is a half a percentage point above. Where's that extra half going to go? It could go to the firm. That's going to be kind of the normal one. But this is when you could also choose to have it credited to the buyer. So if the buyer, this is where the buyer could kind of get a rebate. So and then any non-allowed amount would be paid to the firm. So it could be that it's going to go towards the buyer's closing costs, and maybe they had already negotiated in their offer for closing costs well above. The buyer is getting closing costs in their offer, and there's really no room for a lot of extra there. The credit may not be allowed by the lender, or may not all of it may be allowed by the lender. Then you would get the balance above that. So that's one option. It could be credited to the seller, and that is something that could be a strategy, if you will, for getting your offer accepted. As, hey, seller, you're going to get 0.5% back. So our offer, we're competing with the other offers, but you get to save 0.5% of your compensation. And then the other one is other, and this is where things could get negotiated. This is where you could come up with some other creative way, and I don't know exactly what that would be, but it's going to be. I think for the most part, the first box paid to firm is going to be, most buyers are going to agree to that. They may want a credit, so that would be the second box. If it's going to get fancier than that, then you could go down to the other section and really break it down. Probably a good idea to talk to your manager if you're going to be writing. Anytime there's something other and you're going to be writing up language, probably a good idea to talk to your manager so that we can all work together on it and make sure that you're actually accomplishing what it is you hope to accomplish and not landing yourself in lawsuit territory. Okay, moving on to 6C. So this is where it's going to get more interesting, and could be, I think it's going to be a little more common. And that's the seller's offer is less than the compensation. So your buyer has offered you 2.5, but the seller's offering 2. What's going to happen with that other 0.5%? One of it would be pay the balance of the compensation to the firm at closing. In other words, your buyer. So your buyer's offered you 2.5, the seller's offering 2. In this case, that means your buyer is going to pay you 0.5% at closing, and the seller is going to pay you 2. That's the first box. The second box requests that the seller pay the balance of the compensation to the firm as part of the buyer's offer to purchase the property. Okay, so that gets that's where you're actually going to ask the seller to pay the additional amount. So the seller is offered 2, buyer's offered 2.5. That means there's 0.5% hanging out there. That second box is saying that that they want to request of the seller that they pay the additional amount. And that's where Form 41C will come into play, because 41C is where you can actually ask the seller to pay more than what they're offering in their compensation. And then we get to the box other. And again, this could take on a lot of different looks, but it could be that you could actually get, this is where I can imagine something a little more fancy happening. And Trevor, I think this goes down to the question you were asking earlier. That would be, so again, the seller is offering 2%, your buyer offered you 2.5. There's another 0.5% hanging out there. The numbers could be different, but anyway, your buyer is on the hook for a certain amount under the compensation section here, but you are going to be okay with just taking the seller's 2%. So that's where you would write here, if the seller's compensation is 2% or greater, then the buyer will pay nothing. You know, you could actually come up with something like that. And that's where you might be writing it up after the fact. You might be writing that up. You know, it's kind of a handshake agreement. Hey, you know what? We're going to change this if depending on what the seller's offering, you know, the price point of the home and what I'm going to be making, all of that. This is where you could actually you could write some stuff up there. And it could be that it could be as simple as that you could say something there that you know, you go see the listing, you write up the offer on it. It's a 2% listing, but you realize it's also $1 million house. You're going to make 20 grand, and you're kind of okay with that. And you don't need the extra, you know, the extra 0.5%, the extra $5,000 from your buyer. You just write it up here that if the offer is if the seller is offering above 2%, then the buyer will not be required to pay anything. Does that make sense? Is that helping everybody with that? Yeah, cool. Okay.
I would have you know, if there's a box says that, you know, then it would be easier. That's a recommendation.
Pardon me, Darshan, what was that?
So what you just said, I would have preferred a box that's exactly say that, you know, that the buyer accepts the seller's compensation. You know, if it is lower, that would be easier to check that box rather than us writing that, you know, so.
Well, so you've got 2 separate topics here. One of them is you've got the PSA that says accept as offered. Okay. And I agree with you, that should carry over, but you've got this other agreement with your buyer. We want to avoid disputes. We want everybody to feel as though everybody can trust everybody else. So this is where you could make that change if you want to. We just want it to be something where the buyer doesn't feel as though you're going to come back at them later for that other 0.5%. So again, it's between you and the buyer as far as that goes, but that would be something that I would add to it later. All you have to do is add that line, get initials by it, and a date, and you're good to go. Not a major, it's not going to be a major change, but it'll probably add a nice comfort level and trust level for your buyer. So these are conversations you'll want to have with your buyer in advance, though, so that they understand how this is all going to work.
Can we say the firm accepts the compensation offered by the seller under that other?
What are you trying to say, Naranjan?
So under 6E, last other,
Right.
can we say the buyer, firm accepts the compensation offered by the buyer, by the seller? Isn't that the dispute would be between the between the firm and the buyer? We are trying to eliminate that dispute. So
Okay,
if
so
it-
my question would be, what if you get $1,000 flat? What if the seller offers $1,000 flat? You know, what's going to happen there? Are you just going to accept that and not
Some will
accept it? So
zero.
I would rather that you left this open,
I
or
see.
maybe at least give it some type of limitation so that you get compensated fairly, because you don't know what you're going to get as far as what the sellers are offering.
Got it.
And
Good
that,
point.
again, we're getting into an area in the future here where we don't know what sellers are going to be offering. I'm hoping, I'm optimistic that the sellers are going to be basically doing just business as usual, not changing how they do things. But there's going to be some who are going to probably hear about this law and want to, or they're going to read the contract and say, well, wait a minute, you know, I don't have to pay anything. Why should I?
Yeah.
And so those are the ones that we're more worried about at that point. So
Okay.
anyway, these are going to be ongoing conversations as you work through with people, because every single transaction is going to be a little different, and it's really hard to predict up front what the sellers are offering versus what your buyer's offering and how you're going to split that out with them. And this gives you that opportunity to make it very clear with them, so they understand their responsibilities too.
Perfect. Thanks.
Okay.
Eric, Casey,
Moving.
explain the difference between line 53 and 54.
What was that?
Casey was wondering
53 is you're gonna the buyer is going to pay the difference. So again, the seller offers 2% and the buyer has offered you 2.5%. If you check that box, it just means the buyer's going to pay the difference, whatever it is. The buyer is willing, buyer wants to see you get your whole 2.5% no matter what. That's kind of what that one says. The next one,
Okay, I think I get it.
is that the next one is that they're asking the seller to pay that difference. Okay, so they want you to get the 2.5%, but they want the seller to pay the whole 2.5%. So the seller is offering 2% on their listing. You're going to need to use a form 41C to ask the seller to raise that to 2.5%. So that's what that's what 54 is all about.
Okay, and when it says firm, it's going to the selling agent at the said.
Firm is the buyer's broker's firm.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I got,
We're getting away from the term selling agent because it gets too it was ambiguous to a lot of people. A selling agent could be anybody involved, right? So we've got a listing broker and we've got a buyer's broker. So the firm here in this case is all about because this whole form is between the buyer and the buyer's brokerage.
but
It's the firm.
I guess I'm a little confused because under B, paid to firm, if there's any difference, it goes to is it always going to the agent, or if there's a gap, if the box is checked like above, I thought that's where it goes to the firm, just the firm. Or did I misunderstand?
There's a couple of firms who have workarounds on this, but the law is that your firm gets paid and then we pay you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you are, okay, so in this case, firm is the
Skyline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're
Yeah.
negotiating paid to, essentially, even if it says firm, it's us, basically.
Yeah, it's you. You're going to get that less whatever fees you pay to your company. So yeah. Yep.
And sorry, my second one was, is this essentially something we're doing before we submit buyer's agent, this compensation? Or, because it's essentially going to go on the offer, right? So it will be negotiated when we're drafting the offer, because on that first page of the purchase and sale is where we also write it to match this, essentially, right?
Yeah, so again, if the seller's offering 2.5% and everybody's good with that, you just check the pay as offered and you're doing 2.5%. If the seller is offering 2% and you want to get 2.5%, then you can use a Form 41C to negotiate with the seller that they're going to pay the additional 0.5%, or you'll have your buyer pay you the additional 0.5%. But that's basically what those two boxes are. One of them is the first box, the buyer pays you that additional 0.5%. Second box, we're going to ask the seller with a Form 41C to pay that additional 0.5%. By the way, guys, your managers are all available to you to talk to you about these things when you get into them. There's going to be a lot of different circumstances. There's going to be situations that come up, and just know that we are here for you. Well, Cameron won't be here for you next week, but he'll be here for you after the law takes effect. No, we're here for you. We want to answer these questions. And like I say, every transaction has the potential of being different. So circumstances are going to come up. I want you to pick up the phone and give, me, Cameron, Cindy, I'm looking for Melissa's on here, Jeff's on here somewhere, Ross is on here. I think all of your managers are actually on the call right now, which is pretty cool. We're here for you, and we don't expect you to completely grab all of this information right now, but especially when the circumstances could be very different in your transaction, and maybe we haven't anticipated it in this class. That's okay. We're going to get to that. We're going to be here for you to get to whatever your circumstances are. And really quickly, we're just going to buzz into this compensation terms. And the compensation is due when the buyer purchases real property located in the area during the term. And by the way, the area, you'll have to define your area. Earlier on, I would just say Washington, okay, anywhere in the state. That way you're not limiting it to, to a neighborhood or a one of the MLS area number 640 or something like that. I would make it much more broad than that personally. But it could be that you're going to help somebody in the city of Linwood, and that's the only place that you're going to have an exclusive with them. And they've decided that if they decide to buy in Kent instead, they want to work with somebody who's actually in Kent. That hopefully we won't run into that type of thing. I personally probably wouldn't work with that buyer, but I'm just bringing it up. Exclusive agency. For exclusive agency, the purchase closes. Non-exclusive, the purchase closes and the buyer brokerage firm represents the buyer in such purchase as indicated on the purchase and sale agreement. So that's where we get into the reason I personally wouldn't do a non-exclusive, because I don't want to be guessing as to whether or not I'm actually going to be showing and writing the home. Compensation after expiration. 60 days is what it says here, but this is, you've heard the term tail. If there's on listings, there's going to be a tail period, and that is how long after. So if you're working with your buyer and they've signed off on a 60-day agreement with you, but they buy a property that was brought to their attention by you during the term, in other words, the efforts and actions of the firm, that's you, or through information secured directly or indirectly from or through the firm. Again, you sent them the listing, or a property that the buyer inquired about to the firm during the term. In other words, they asked you, hey, could you show me this house? Then compensation is due when the purchase closes. Now, this is a contract between you and the buyer. If the buyer goes off and cheats on you, again, we get into a whole different place where arbitration could say that, well, the buyer, somebody else wrote it up, and yet they had an exclusive with you, and the offer was accepted. That other broker may still get compensated if the buyer lied to them. And this could be where the buyer could actually be penalized and have to pay your compensation anyway. Anyway, hopefully we don't run into these things, but it'll come up. And again, we'll talk about them as they come up. We're not going to try to anticipate every scenario right now. And we'll deal with scenarios as they arise. But hopefully most of your folks are honorable people who will sign this form and will work with you accordingly. So that is that's the essentials of what we wanted to cover form wise in the class here today. So we're going to move into a whole different section now and give people a chance to kind of work on a little bit of a. We're actually going to turn it into a little bit of a role play, right, Cameron? So
Yes. Hey,
I'm going
Austin
to
and
switch
Mary.
to different form, but let's. I do want to open the floor up. Are there any final questions on this form 41?
I've been
Looks like Mary
crushing through
Sybil,
the
you've got your.
Eric, I've been crushing through the questions, but Austin and Marisabel, can you just type your questions in the chat bar and I'll answer them because this class is only supposed to be till 1:30 and it's already 1:27. So please just type your questions in the chat bar
and
I can answer them.
You what?
Oh, I was just telling them that they can type their questions in the chat bar instead of continuing to raise their hands, and I can answer them while you go over the role play stuff.
Okay, that works. All right, so we're gonna jump into, and this is attached in the chat. There's a place where you can actually download it from there, right, Cameron? Is that
correct? It's in the Dropbox file.
Okay, perfect. So you can go in there and you can click on it and then download these questions. What we've done, so this was an exercise with all of us managers basically brainstormed some of the questions that would come up. Okay, and why would they use you? Why would they sign this agreement? This is all new. So we've got a few basic answers, the basics of why your buyer needs to sign this. Well, the Washington legislature requires it, the Department of Licensing requires it, Northwest MLS requires it, your Skyline Management requires it, and any other broker that the buyer works with is going to require. We shortened it up to the BBSA, that's the Buyer's Brokerage Services Agreement. So there's your top 5 answers. You've got somebody else to blame. I don't know about the rest of you, but it's really nice when I've got somebody else to blame on why I have to do something. And so if you blame your managers, blame the DOL, blame the state, whatever it might be. But it's something that's going to happen. They're going to have to do it with anybody they work with. So that's kind of the big thing. But maybe they're just meeting you, and maybe they're not comfortable working with you exclusively because they haven't worked with you yet. If it's somebody you've been working with for a while, hopefully they wouldn't have any problem with this whatsoever. You just tell them, hey, this is new as of January 1st. I've got to have this signed by any buyer I work with, and we've been working together a while. Hopefully you'll be okay. But anyway, so then it can get more challenging. That's when you get into the buyers who maybe are pushing back for some reason on wanting to sign this with you. It's really going to be probably more of a you thing at that point. And I don't say that negatively. It's just that your buyers they're hesitant, and for whatever reason, they aren't certain that they want to be committed to you for the next 60 days or 120 days or whatever period of time you're dealing with. And that's where we've given you a whole other list of questions. So you can certainly read through these. We're not going to read every single one of them, but this is like I say, this is a brainstorming session between all of your managers. We came up with questions or answers that we would give potentially in that. It kind of goes down to your value proposition. What is it that makes you valuable to this buyer? What are you doing for them? And here it is. There's just a ton of different things here. So it's a really comprehensive list. And I'm actually quite proud to present it to you because it's gonna give you that value proposition. So anyway, I want to throw it out there to the floor, and I don't want to necessarily call on somebody randomly. So I'm going to ask a question, and I would like a volunteer to speak up. And if I don't get a volunteer, I may actually call on a couple people who I know who are out here who aren't afraid of the microphone. So you know, I've never had to do this in the past when I bought a home. You know, I'm really not. I really don't want to do this. Why should I sign this form with you? Yeah, I'm looking for volunteers.
Well, you
Not going to get any volunteers. Okay, Naranjan's going to. All right.
Yeah, you made the short. You have those first 5 items there, which on this list, which is awesome. I think you just tell them that this is what's required. I won't even say that the form requires it. If we talk about the state and Northwest MLS, that's enough of a ammunition to convince them that they need to do it. And I think, you know, most of the clients that you work with they come to you because they trust you. So I think you just have to use that to go for it.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that. Yeah. And that last part where they're going to have to sign it with somebody. It might as well be you, right? So
yeah.
Yeah. If
Well,
they don't
that,
want to
you
sign
know,
it, the big question is to find out why, you know, what's going on there. Um, and our goal is to make it about them. What's in it for them? Not, you know, we've got the blame part, and that's good. But if they push harder, and they're not ready to commit to you, then let them know what's in it for them by committing to you.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to speak up on their ideas on this?
So we can say it is not to be a surprise for them also at the end after we write the transaction, hey, what it is. So it is upfront for the clarity between the agent and the buyer. Hey, this is what it costs. We are talking the terms for my services. This is what I will be charging. And we are having this upfront, the discussion and an agreement before we start working together in order to avoid surprises later. And now this is something is required by the law also to have this agreement done.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So
the DOL requires it and the state requires it. And like you said, if anybody you go hire is going to make you sign this anyway. So end of story. It's not.
There you go. Good. Now, okay, so I'm going to add an extra twist now that we've had a couple of people volunteer. And by the way, I love you for turning on your mic and answering. It's nothing worse than role play for a lot of people and answering those types of questions. So I appreciate it. But so here's a little twist on it, and that is, well, why should I agree to pay you 3%? Or 2.5%. It doesn't have to be a fixed percent, but we're asking them to pay that if the seller won't pay it. So what's in it for them? Why would they do that? It's not just because the state requires it or whatever. Now we're getting into the negotiated part. So I'm going to open it up again. Anybody who wants to answer, why would I?
Yes,
why would I pay you 2.5%?
Yes. So for the services as an agent, I'm providing to you. So the market expertise, the price range, how much to offer, and the process itself, guiding throughout the process and calling out the timelines and making sure you're protected, what is needed. So all those things, if you don't have an agent and you will, and you might have like these things, little bit difficult scenarios where you might end up in some losing the earnest money also. So as an agent and as an expertise in this area, I'll guide through and give the right suggestions in a timely manner. So for that reason.
Really good, Gita. So that is what it's really all about, is your value proposition. What do you do for these people? What is it that, you know, just the things where you're going to set yourself apart from other brokers? What, they're professing their loyalty to you with this form. What are you doing for them to be loyal in return? So now that was a really good, it was probably a half a minute, and you covered so many things that were really important as to what the buyer will get from you. So, and I would recommend to everybody come up with your little 30 to 60-second value proposition. And that's a lot of what these bullet points are all about, is giving you additional value proposition things that you can think about and build into your little speech. Anybody else? Why would I pay you if the seller's not going to pay the compensation?
Hi, Eric. This is Drew.
Hey, Drew.
With buyers, I
Drew, you froze up. I'm not sure if you've got a
Excuse me?
signal issue at your end.
Yeah, I do then. Never mind.
Oh, no, that's okay. Go ahead. Just hold really still. You're in a good spot right now.
Okay. Yeah, that happens at my house. I will show buyers 10 listings in their price range in their area, and I'll show them the agent detail that shows selling office commission. I say, see, this pays 2.5, this pays 2.5, this pays 3, this pays 2.5, this pays 2.5. Well, this guy's paying 1%, but I guarantee you, if you need to pay me, we can whack them on the price, because other agents won't want to show this listing.
No, that's good. And that is, it's I want you to be careful about saying anything about whether or not especially if well, it's really, will anybody show? We don't want to give our industry that black eye that, oh yeah, we'll only show houses if we're getting paid. But the truth of the matter is, the law actually dictates that if you're not getting compensated at all, you don't have to show a home. But if you are being offered compensation, technically you have to do it. But have that conversation, have it kind of in a fun way, because it is the truth, and that is that there's a lot of brokers out there that won't show a home that's under a certain amount. They may not, if it fits the criteria their client is looking for, they should show it to their client, no matter what they're making. And then they should negotiate it using the Form 41C. But, you can be upfront about things with people and say, hey, you know what, this is a good one where, we might ask for a little less, because they're offering, they're already offering less. So there's, they're not going to have the same audience because they're only offering 1% or a flat fee or something like that.
Yep.
It's all part of the strategy of getting your clients into the home that they can, that they want and can close on.
I would also reference.
Do you think it would be appropriate to say something along the lines of, if you're only asking for 2.5% commission, can you say, I really don't see you having to pay any of the commission, because most of the listings that we see nowadays offer 2.5%. It's just in the oddball case you see a house that you really love and the seller only wants to give 1%.
They're not.
Yeah, and that's where we got into that little section, Malik, on the where you could come up with that other scenario, because you are correct. Actually, I did the stats recently. 54% of all listings are 2.5% right now. And then it is something like another 44% were 3%. And then there's the rest. And so it's pretty rare you're going to get anything below 2.5% to 3%. And on those rare ones, it's still primarily 2%. It doesn't slip down into the sub 2, except on almost single digits throughout the entire MLS.
I see. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a good idea if we have an agreement at 2.5% and we get a listing that's offering 1%. before we see it, we talk to the buyers and say, this seller is only paying 1%. If you bought this house, you would need to pay my company 1.5%. Do you still want to see it? And by the way, we don't need to come in full price.
No, that's a great way to do that. And you're going to have this already covered in your Form 41. And this is part of the discussion you'll have in advance. So Drew, that was a really good example of things you could talk about in advance with them, so that they understand how it's all going to shake out. And again, if you give them the option that, hey, if the seller isn't willing to pay more, do you guys still want to buy this house? Now, the challenge might be if they say, well, we want to see the house anyway. And, you know, well, if you've got the buyer's agency agreement with them, then they know that they're going to be paying you the difference. That's where this is very valuable that we've got this agreement, because in the past, it was kind of this open-ended thing where we didn't have the agreement. And unfortunately, the average broker did not use buyer agency agreements with their buyers. Now we all have to. So, but it's a good time to bring that up. These are the discussions you can have in that first buyer consultation.
It's important. It's
Eric,
important to remind them.
What's that?
It's important to remind a buyer when we have a house with a very low commission. I had a buyer who was spitting nails because they paid 2.25, and we had a buyer broker agreement at 2.5, and she had to write a check for 2,000 at closing for me. Luckily, her earnest money was 15,000.
No, it is, and that's the thing. I want everybody to be comfortable being transparent with your buyers. Talk to them about this. Let them know, you know, if they've agreed to 2.5% with you, and you are showing them a house that's 1%. Have that discussion with them. Make sure that they understand what's going to happen if they close on this. And if you're going to compromise somewhere in there, I want you to get it in writing. And that's where that other section can come in. You can add that after the fact.
Eric, is this
Hey,
delta amount, the difference between what the seller is offering and what we have agreed to with the buyer, is that can that be financed? I mean, I will call people that I work with, but have you heard of anything? Because I'm not sure how that will be considered as a part of the transaction, or do the people have to come up with that money from their own pocket?
That is a lender question, because for the most part, I don't know of any lenders who are willing to pay for compensation as a closing cost, and yet they've always been willing to pay for it as part of this the purchase price, right?
Yeah.
So it's really just it's a shift in thinking, but the lenders aren't there yet. So keep pressing your lenders, ask these questions, and see if you can't get it built into the closing costs, because I do think that's actually going to become more and more pertinent, more of the future of lending, is it that they're going to build that into the closing costs that they will allow to be paid under the mortgage terms.
Okay. All right.
All right. Anybody else? Well, I think this is a really good starting point, and I really appreciate all of you being here, being so engaged. I appreciate the questions. Cameron, were there any outstanding questions that you maybe want to voice out loud? Or
Rachel actually had a pretty good question that she was asking about, what about the Redfin setup, like with them being showing agents? Do those guys have to sign? I'm curious too. What are your thoughts on that, Eric?
That is going to be an interesting thing for Redfin, and I haven't thought about, they've got their door openers. Yeah, they're not going to have to sign the broker agreement, but whoever writes up the offer is going to, and whoever they're working with, they're going to be Redfin. You get assigned a broker, and that broker will be with you all the time. They're going to be the one who will write up your offers and all of that, even though you might work with other brokers along the way who may answer your questions or open the door or whatever it might be. So I do see that. Redfin is getting squeezed hard on their rebates, by the way. So any of this, anything that they're going to have to build the rebates into their buyer agency agreements. So I'm sure they will probably have their own contracts for this. And my best advice is don't worry about Redfin. They're hurting right now. They're laying off agents. This is weird. Agents, for the most part, are paid, as you are, through compensation from either the buyer or the seller. Well, Redfin, they're paid a salary and maybe a little bit of a bonus. So they're bleeding right now. They all of these rebates, all of the cut commissions and everything they're doing. They are in trouble. Their investors are frustrated with them right now because they haven't seen the black yet. They've been in the red the whole time. So, and this is a conversation you may have with your buyers if they're considering Redfin for some reason, because maybe they're going to get a rebate. They only get the rebate if they're also listing a home, by the way. There's fine print at Redfin these days that says that if you list your home with us, we'll give you a rebate when you buy a home. They're not going to give it to you just because you exist, just because you walk in the door and say, I'm a buyer. That's no longer their business model, because again, they're losing money so fast that they can barely keep the doors open right now. So
I'm just curious.
they laid off a ton of agents. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel.
Trying to understand. So you know how you can click or your buyers can go, everybody uses Redfin, right? So like the bottom right says like tour this home now, and then you can pick like the time that works for you. I just want to make sure, granted, I've never really tried it. I guess I could pretend to be a buyer one day, but like they don't have the verbiage somewhere in their set up a tour now. There's no verbiage in there that would make them make a buyer sign this new form with new agencies. I just want to make sure my buyers aren't secretly touring the home with Redfin thinking that they didn't sign something. I don't know. I just feel like there's hidden verbiage somewhere in Redfin, but if it's not, I'm not really worried about the listing side, but it's more like the touring.
Yeah, no, I'm sure they're going to have their own little catch. They want to hook people. They are a lead gen company more than anything else. Their whole system is built to get leads, and those leads they feed to their agents. And if their agent closes them, then that's their whole goal. Part of the conversation you're going to have with a buyer is we know full well that they are looking at Zillow and they're looking at Redfin. Be really frank with them, and this goes, this also goes when they go out and look at an open house or something like that. Let them know that that they are that they should contact you and you will set up the showing. They shouldn't click on that thing that says arrange a tour now. They should work with you. And if you're not a broker who, I know of a couple of our brokers who do this, and that is they say contact Redfin and they'll get a showing agent, and then if you like it, we'll write it up. Okay, that's really going to go away with this new system. And what I want you to do instead is have that conversation with your buyer. Make sure they understand that that you are here for them, that you are going to be the one showing them the houses. And you can certainly hire somebody else. Cameron could call me up and say, hey, I'm on vacation next week. Will you show this house to my buyer? And I'd say, sure. That kind of thing. You can have that type of arrangement, and I'm not going to steal that client from him. But I'm talking about the Redfins, the Zillows, Realtor.com, whatever it might be. If your client is talking to another agent, that's a problem under this, especially under this new law, because they've got an exclusive buyer's brokerage agreement with you. So my recommendation is have that talk up front. Let them know, hey, I understand you're probably going to be seeing houses on Redfin. I'm going to send you listings as well, and some of them are going to overlap with what you see on Redfin. But that said, if you see one on Redfin that I haven't sent you, please contact me, tell me the address or the MLS number, and I will make arrangements for you to see that. And I will be there with you, because in order to write a good offer for you, I need to be there at the time you see the house, that kind of conversation. So have that. And again, that's part of your value proposition with these folks. This is why they're signing this agreement with you. It's because you're going to do this stuff for them. It's not about finding the house anymore, right? It's about getting them the best terms on the house and getting them, showing them a house and finding out if the house is good for them and giving them the information. Again, all the things that are on these bullet points here in this form, that's your value proposition, and that's why they're doing it, not because you found the house or they found the house on Redfin.
Eric.
Hi, Amy.
Hey, just to piggyback on that. So one of my longtime best friends works with Redfin, and we had this conversation, and I will just piggyback on what you said, that absolutely we need to have that conversation, because what Redfin is telling their brokers to do is get that, to get the agreement signed at the door. So if they, so they're going to get that sign. That's what they're coaching them to do right now, is sign it the second you meet them at that first property. So that's a huge, huge conversation that absolutely has to happen. And when you click on that tour now, or pick a time, it's obviously has no connection to the MLS. That time may or may not be available, but a lot of people don't understand that. But that's just another feature that is not accurate.
Great insight. Thank you. Yeah, that's the, yeah, it doesn't link to showing time when they click on the show me the home or anything like that. So yeah, no, that's great. So use that information, folks. That's Redfin's going to be making them sign it at the door. They probably, they won't even let them in the door. Well, I'll turn this key for you if you sign this form. So you guys cannot be almost that hardcore too, but be friendly about it. Don't be a smart ass like I just was. So. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to share?
Yeah, Eric.
Very good. Well, we
about to handle it with the seller. Can I tell the seller if you don't want to pay anything to the buyer's broker? Is that okay? I mean, I can tell them that just pay 1% as an agent.
I'm not following you. Are you talking as a listing broker?
Yeah, I'm the listing broker. I can tell the sellers that you don't need to pay the buyer's broker if you don't want to. How to handle it?
You can tell them that. I'm going to piggyback on what Drew was talking about earlier, and that is that if your seller, this is why I think sellers are not going to change their ways all that rapidly, is because they want to sell their house, not just list it.
Okay.
And that is that if they're offering more, then that in this case it means the buyer is less likely to have to pay their broker. So it's a win for the seller. They're gonna pay some commission, but they're also charging that out of the price of their home anyway. And who's really paying it? The buyer, because the buyer's the one who's actually buying the home. It's going to get financed and all the rest. It's going to simplify the process. So really, the sellers who don't want to pay that, I think, are short-sighted. Now, that said, it's always negotiable. And we can't tell the seller that they have to do this or their home won't sell. But we can definitely let them know that it is going to change the audience to the buyers who can afford to pay their broker the additional amount. It's going to rule out FHA buyers who are 3.5% down or VA buyers who are 0 down. Those people are buying because they don't have piles of money sitting around. They're using those loan programs because they don't have a bunch of liquidity. So they're not going to be able to pay their broker either. So they're going to be looking for the homes that they're not going to have to go out of pocket.
Eric, isn't
Again,
there also am I in Form 41, I think it's to paragraph 8, the showings listings, it actually says showing property buyer broker shall or shall not be obligated to show properties to buyer for which there's no seller's offer.
That's a 0. Yeah, so you're right, Melissa, but that's a 0%. So what if they're offering 1? What if they're offering 1%? That doesn't apply. It no longer applies.
But if they're out, that's one thing I would bring up to a seller, that if they don't want to pay any commission, like, hey, you could potentially be losing out on these buyers that have an agreement that say, you know, brokers don't have to show these listed properties with 0%.
Yeah. No, and I agree. The 0% threat has been going around for years now because it's been available to sellers for a long, long time. And interestingly, when it first came out that because this class action suit was raised, it hadn't been settled yet or hadn't been litigated yet. But it raised a big fuss, and our Northwest MLS said, sellers, you don't have to offer anything. We made it very clear they did not have to offer it. And it was it was less than 1% of all listings went 0%. So that's why I'm very optimistic that we're not going to see a big change there. So I think sellers for the most part get it. They may resent it, but they get it. And it's more the conversation with the buyer for those occasions when you get the seller who's only offering 1%.
Right, sure.
Then you know what's going to happen. And those sellers need to understand it is going to change their audience. 0%, nobody has to show their home. 1%, if my buyer asks me to show it, I've got to show it to them. But that doesn't mean I don't have the discussion that Drew was talking about, and that is that, hey, you know, here's the thing: is that it's you're going to have to pay more. You're going to have to pay compensation, that kind of thing. Do you still want to see this house? I just think it's short-sighted of sellers to offer less than a reasonable amount. And part of that is because the buyers can't finance it yet at this point.
Yeah.
I've seen
Oh, very good.
This is Drew. I've seen hundreds of homes where they saved money. They listed with Redfin, they listed with Help You Sell. They offer a 2% commission. And then you go back and you look at their sales price and go, well, what do you know? They spent 150 days on the market and they sold for 40,000 less than list. It happens with great regularity. On a listing appointment, I will ask a seller, I said, well, if you made 60,000 at your job, would you quit your job to go take a job that paid you 45,000? And they say, of course not. And then my response is, well, agents don't want to do that either.
No, that's kind of a whole separate topic, and that is what do we talk to our sellers about to get them to offer the compensation? But I don't think that's going to be as hard a conversation as getting our buyers to do something that they've never done in the past. So that's what we got here. So no, this is good. Well, everybody, we're at the 2-hour mark, and so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. We are going to do this class again next week. It'll probably have some different questions, but it's going to be primarily the same. We want to open it up so brokers who couldn't attend this week can attend next week. And then in January, we're going to have a couple of more classes. And after hearing some of the questions we had today, I think we want to do a seller-focused version. But one of the classes coming up is we're going to work through buyer objections, that kind of thing, and just kind of work with that. We've got the bullet points you've got here are the responses to objections, but we're actually going to present you with a group think of what the objections might be. So we'll be, and because they're going to be, I think we've got about 30 of them that are bullet pointed right now. So that'll be a class coming up in January. Scott's going to be doing that one primarily. So anyway, that's where we're at today. And I want to thank all of you for giving us your time and attention today. I hope it all makes sense. Again, please, anybody who calls me up and says, hey, Eric, I hate to bug you. Well, you're bugging me by saying the word bug me, because other than that, you're not bugging me. I want to answer your questions. All of us managers, that's what we're here for. And we respect and like you because you ask questions. When you ask questions, it means you don't get in trouble later. We don't have to fix a problem after the fact when it's already heading towards lawsuit. Instead, we're fixing it before you even write it up. So anyway, we're here to help. And I want to encourage you, please pick up the phone and call us. When you get those specific situations, we're here to help answer those for you. So other than that, everybody have a wonderful afternoon, and I'm going to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you, Eric.
Something.
Thank you.
All
Merry
right.
Christmas.
Merry
Thank you.
Christmas.